Born from big ambitions, these modern-day towns are now eerily lifeless landmarks, built to accommodate booming populations before misfortune or misjudgment rendered them obsolete. From hundreds of abandoned chateaux to futuristic holiday homes that failed to find buyers, discover the deserted settlements that fell by the wayside. Thames Town, Shanghai, China. From its red telephone boxes and black cabs to the winding cobbled streets and Victorian terraces, this ghost town is a pastiche of all things British. The only difference is, this London look-alike is 30 kilometers from downtown Shanghai. Dubbed the real-life Truman Show, this odd development was completed in 2006 to the eye-watering tune of $660 million. The project began as part of an initiative to lure 500,000 people away from overcrowded Shanghai and into smaller satellite suburbs, which were designed to resemble European cities. Once a field of rice paddies, Thames Town is now home to a Gothic church, scenic canals, mock Tudor pubs and elegant Edwardian townhouses. The only thing missing is people. With properties priced well out of reach for Shanghai's middle-class residents, most houses were purchased as investments or second homes and now lie vacant. While the location is a popular backdrop for wedding photographs, no one is hanging around. Behind the grand facade, retail units and restaurants lie empty. Even the town's bronze James Bond statue holds no sway in pulling in residents to this perplexing place. Glen Rio, New Mexico and Texas, USA. Uniquely positioned on the state line between Texas and New Mexico, Glen Rio began life as a railroad town in 1903. A stopping point on the Rock Island and Pacific Road, the quaint town was once home to a motel, grocery stores, service stations, and cafes. Dawn of the national highway system in the 1930s, Glen Rio became a popular stopping point for road trippers driving the iconic Route 66. Despite the population barely rising above 30, the small town was thriving and even played host to film crews when John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath was shot there in 1940. Former resident John Paul Ferguson worked at the gas stations during the summer and recalls the constant streams of traffic through the town. However, Glen Rio's luck ran out in 1975 when Interstate 40 bypassed the town, cutting it off from the passing tourist trade. All that remains now of the once booming spot is 17 abandoned buildings and the old Route 66 roadbed, an evocative location harking back to America's mid-century heyday. The remarkable ghost town was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 2017. Yet, Ukraine. On April 26, 1986, the number 4 reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine exploded during blackout tests. Pripyat, only a few kilometers from the disaster and home to over 49,000 people, was evacuated within 36 hours. Declared radioactive and uninhabitable for at least 24,000 years, nature has taken back the city. Towering trees compete with derelict apartment blocks, breaking up the concrete of the once bustling pathways and roads. For a toxic town, the landscape has proved fertile ground for Mother Nature to take hold. Residents here fled as soon as possible, taking only the essentials with them. Belongings are still strewn inside residential homes and public buildings. In this classroom, notebooks and stationery litter the desks, with the last lesson's notes still visible on the blackboard. Reminder of the city's carefree heyday, Pripyat Amusement Park's yellow Ferris wheel now stands in stark contrast with its overgrown surroundings. In the heart of the exclusion zone, it's unlikely that life here will ever return to normal. However, that hasn't kept curious tourists out, with tens of thousands visiting the tragic region every year. Centralia, Pennsylvania, USA. Once home to thousands, this Pennsylvania mining town's population upped and left following a bizarre fire that began in 1962 and still rages on today, more than 55 years later. The blaze began the day before Labor Day. In a strange series of events, the fire was intentionally set in order to burn out an old landfill beneath the town. However, the site was connected to a system of disses coal mining tunnels, and the inferno quickly spiraled out of control. Here, a crack along the town's deserted Highway 61 still billows out sulfurous gases. Blaze spewed toxic fumes into the atmosphere, and over the years the ground beneath the borough reached over 900 degrees in some locations. With gas pouring into basements and sinkholes suddenly opening up, a $42 million relocation plan saw most of Centralia's residents up sticks and leave the poisonous district in 1980. Mass exodus swept the town. Most of the homes were demolished. Single properties like this are a stark reminder of the town's former life. Still alight today, it's said that there's enough coal underground to fuel the blaze for a further 250 years. Sanzhi Pod City, New Taipei, Taiwan. Designed as a seaside holiday resort for U.S. military officers and middle-class Taiwanese, the Sanzhi Pod City is giving us all sorts of heebie-jeebies. The eerie development was never completed, having been left to rack and ruin in 1980. Located on the northern coast of Taiwan, the futuristic resort town featured a complex of bright UFO-shaped homes and a large swimming pool complex. Construction was halted on the site 2 years after it had begun, with the developers citing financial constraints following investment losses. In a retro style that was popular at the time, the price of these unique homes was so high that almost none of the pods sold. They were abandoned on the overgrown coastline, reduced to graffitied ruins frequented by curious tourists. The deserted development, which would have offered residents tranquil sea views, was demolished in 2010, with plans to turn the site into a resort and water park. Here's hoping the new project is more successful than its predecessor. Wittenoom, Pilbara, Australia. This next abandoned outpost has been described as one of the most dangerous and contaminated places on the planet. Located in the dry, dusty climes of Pilbara, the unassuming small town of Wittenoom belies a toxic secret below ground. From the 1930s to the 60s, Wittenoom was home to around 20,000 people, many of whom worked in Australia's only blue asbestos mine, which was located there. More than 2,000 deaths have been linked to the town's toxic mining activities, and the mine subsequently closed its doors for good in 1966. After the closure, the population began to rapidly decline, leaving buildings like Doc Holliday's Cafe to the dust. In 2007, the Western Australia government officially struck Wittenoom off the map and cut off the town's electricity supply and mail services. It's been labelled one of the most significant industrial disasters in Western Australia, and while the government has tried to dissuade visitors from venturing into the contaminated area, Wittenoom remains a popular destination for those seeking so-called dark tourism. Tyneham, Dorset, UK. Once home to 225 people, the rural village of Tyneham in the southwest of England is now no more than ruins. Its population deserted the town just before Christmas in 1943, though it wasn't exactly by choice. Second World War raged on. The War Office requisitioned the town to use as a tank firing range prior to D-Day. Residents were promised that they could return to their homes once the war was over. As they left, a note was pinned on the door of Tyneham Church that read, "Thank you for treating the village kindly." However, Tyneham's residents never did return. Decades later, the village's manor house, pictured, is a relic of its former self, and the post office, rectory and cottages stand roofless and crumbling. While the evacuation was intended to be temporary, the army placed a compulsory purchase order on the land in 1948 and has retained it for military use ever since. Strange beauty of Tyneham's ruins has fascinated passing walkers for decades. We can only imagine the gorgeous sea views that former residents once enjoyed from this dilapidated farmhouse. New Idria, California, USA. Nestled in an arid canyon in San Benito County, California, the town of New Idria is a relatively recent relic of days gone by. A collection of rickety steel buildings are all that remains of the former mining settlement, which was abandoned in the 1970s. Built to service the new Idria mercury mine which opened in 1854, the town flourished as around 300 workers moved to the area, with a school, post office and residential homes built on the previously vacant scrubland. However, when mining came to a halt in 1972, the town's livelihood was stripped away and its last residents relocated to more prosperous parts. Now reduced to a sad state of disrepair, over 100 structures still remain on the deserted site. Over the years, fears of mercury contamination have plagued the ghost town, and in 2011, the Environment Protection Agency added New Idria to its Superfund list of polluted locations. A yellow posted sign warns trespassers away from this abandoned clapboard home. However, we have a feeling that swaths of visitors are no longer a problem in New Idria. Craco, Matera, Italy. Situated in the southern Italian province of Matera, Craco must be one of the most unlucky locations in the world. After decades of bearing the brunt of Mother Nature, the town was finally abandoned in 1980. The hilltop village has been occupied since the 10th century BC, and at its height in 1881, the population exceeded 2,000 residents. However, 1963 signaled the start of a downward spiral with a landslide that saw inhabitants move to a neighboring valley. The situation worsened in 1972 when floods struck, and a subsequent earthquake in 1980 proved the final nail in the coffin of this historic town. Inside the remaining buildings, signs of domesticity remain, with a hearth and bed frame still visible in this dilapidated house. These days Craco is blocked off for safety reasons. However, guided tours are now available for curious tourists. Next to its dramatic landscape, the town has also been used as a backdrop for some of Hollywood's biggest blockbusters, including The Passion of Christ and Quantum of Solace. Decades later, Craco's mystical charm still endures. Inside the San Nicola Church, vaulted columns hint at the former grandeur of this historic settlement. Burj Al Babas, Bolu Province, Turkey. Nestled in a rural mountainous spot, halfway between Istanbul and Ankara, this abandoned development is a surreal sight to behold. Hundreds of mini chateaux, in various stages of completion, stand in a deathly silent valley after funding for the project dried up. Construction of the Burj Al Babas development in Turkey began in 2014, led by the Craco Group. Around 587 chateaux have been finished. However, following the collapse of the Turkish economy in 2018, the company declared bankruptcy and the project was brought to a standstill. Once complete, the complex was intended to accommodate 732 villas, a shopping center, cinema, restaurants and fitness facilities worth between $400,000 and $500,000. The identical three-story villas, which look like something from the pages of Cinderella, feature turrets and elaborate circular balconies. The abandoned construction site can still be seen just beyond the boundary of the $200 million estate. Craco Group's deputy chairman Mezar Yurglan has hopes that the project will one day continue, but for now, this is one fairy tale without a happy ending.